3, 2, 1, live. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name's McKaylee. I work at Tattered Cover Bookstore. And first and foremost, I want to say thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of our virtual community. And thank you for supporting local independent bookstores. We would not be here the last year or the last 50 without you. Because believe it or not, 2021 is Tattered Cover's 50th anniversary. And it is a huge deal for a bookstore. And we have it all to thank you, our community, that has supported us and spread the word about us throughout these years. And it's incredible that we're still here. And that's all thanks to you all. So thank you for joining us. Before I go any further, I want to let you know that closed captioning is enabled on this video. There's a black bar at the bottom of the screen with a button labeled CC on it. If you click that button, closed captioning is enabled if you want it or need it. And for those of you joining us who may not have heard of Tattered Cover before, Tattered Cover Bookstore is a local independent bookstore in Denver, Colorado. We have 4 locations in the Denver metro area, soon to be 5, which is amazing. We have our all children's location opening up at Stanley Marketplace in Aurora, and that's going to be later over the summer. And currently, one of our stores is move. Our Lodo store is moving to McGregor Square across the street from Coors Field, and we're hoping that opens late May, early June. Construction's weird, it happens, but we keep an eye out for those, and the best way to get updates on that is to follow us on social media or sign up for our email newsletter. But for our other 3 stores, we're still open. You can come in as long as you're wearing your mask over your mouth and your nose. We're still having a store-wide policy for masks right now to protect our staff and other customers. So you can come in and join us and browse for about 90 minutes or so. Or you can order all your books online at tatteredcover.com. Stay shopping in your pajamas or when it's oddly rainy outside, which is weird weather for Denver, not gonna lie. But you can do that at tatteredcover.com. Also on tatteredcover.com are all of our events. Holy cow, we have so many events, and I should know I'm helping run a majority of them. But one of my favorites that I'm excited about, being a theater nerd that I am, is Cassine Gaines and his new book, Footnotes, which is just an amazing history of Black artists on the Great White Way, on Broadway, and Shuffle Along, the musical. Check that out. That's going to be May 26th, but there's so many more to enjoy as well. So check that out at tatteredcover.com/event. But the author that we have here tonight and this afternoon, excuse me, I'm very excited for, and it's very fitting because we are talking about Adrian Miller's new book, Black Smoke, African Americans and the United States of Barbecue. And believe it or not, it is National Barbecue Day. So for those of you whose nicer weather outside, this book should be nothing but inspiration to get out there and grill for dinner tonight. A little bit about Adrian. He is an award-winning author and international speaker on food history, and culture. Miller is the recipient of a James Beard Foundation Book Award for Soul Food, the surprising story of an American cuisine, one plate at a time, and the author of The President's Kitchen Cabinet, the story of the African Americans who have fed our first families, from the Washingtons to the Obamas. Miller was featured as a consultant on Netflix's Chef Table Barbecue and is a certified Kansas City Barbecue Society judge. His newest book, Black Smoke, African Americans in the United States of Barbecue, released the 27th of April, published by University of North Carolina Press. Black Smoke honors and celebrates the stories of Black men and women who have shaped American barbecue. And that is the book that we are here to talk about tonight. And it is my honor to welcome Denver-based local Adrian Miller. And I'm gonna turn his microphone off and change our camera view so that we can see him here. Hello, sir, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I'm so excited to just get my mouth watering, talking about this amazing book, amazing recipes that you have in here, but also incredible history where, for those of us who may not know this history, learn a whole hell of a lot. So thank you so much for this book, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, normally when people ask me how I'm doing, I say chillin', but since it's National Barbecue Day, I'm gonna say grillin'.
I love it. That's perfect. I'm a big pun fan, so there you go. I want to start off by asking about Black Smoke in general. And what is this book about? Because some may be joining who haven't gotten their copy yet, which you can do at tatteredcover.com or at any of our stores. But I want to just ask, what is this book about? And then that can launch us into the rest of our conversation here today.
So yeah, Black Smoke is really a part celebration and part restoration. So it's a celebration of African American barbecue culture. And then it's a restoration because unfortunately, in recent years, African Americans have been pushed to the sidelines of barbecue storytelling. And so it's just like, hold up, that's whack. And so it's putting African Americans back in the middle of the story. Because if you look at the grand sweep of history in terms of barbecue, African Americans have made significant contributions and arguably have shaped much of what we consider barbecue today.
Sorry, I was muted because I have background noise, but I mean,
Okay.
see, that's incredible. And the fact that you're taking all of this history and able to put it at least in one place, which is a starting point to do further research for those who are interested. And I think that's incredible. I want to ask about a line that you gave in an article with the Denver Post was, I think the through line for Black Smoke is essentially to write the untold history of African American food culture. And untold is a bit of a misnomer because in some sense I'm bringing forth new stories, and in a lot of cases I'm just reviving old ones. And I loved that quote, and I want to ask you about finding these stories. How did you find them? What did your research look like? And then what was it like bringing them to light in this book?
Yeah, so the biggest boon to my research was historical newspapers. So fortunately, the Library of Congress and other companies are digitizing old newspapers, and some of them go and other sources, and some of them go back to the 1500s and 1600s. So once you figure out how food was discussed in that time, because the term barbecue hasn't always been consistent over time. So sometimes people called it broiling and other, but once you figure all that out, all of these stories come to the forefront. And so, yeah, the reason why I say I'm reviving these stories is because, I'm unearthing things that were written about 100, 200 years ago. And what's really cool is, and why I love newspapers is much more so than books and other things. Newspapers were about capturing the daily life of a community. So they were going to go find those stories. They were going to try to figure out, well, who's this person? What's this event? What's going on here? And so you get a lot of details. The other ways that I research is, of course, looking through books, reading as many barbecue books as I could. And then because I care about my subject so much, I decided to eat my way through the country. So I've been to over 200 barbecue places. And then that's just when I started counting. And yeah. And then the other thing was like watching a lot of barbecue television too. So it was consuming a lot of barbecue media just to see, okay, what are they saying? What are they talking about? And are they featuring African Americans?
Well, and that's the main premise of this book is bringing forth that representation that should be there. And one of the things that I found very interesting was the fact that in our native city of Denver, there's only two African American barbecue joints. Is that correct? That you know of? That's very surprising to me and very interesting. Can you talk a little bit more about how you found those locally and how they contributed to your research as well?
Yeah, so a lot of places have closed over time, and there was a lot of forces going on with that. So it depends on if you mean like Denver city limits proper or the Denver area. So
Denver
uh,
area.
yeah, okay. If you say Denver area, well, it's probably I can't say that there's more than five or so brick and mortar locations. There are some food trucks. So yeah, and one of my beloved ones was Boney's Smokehouse, which was downtown Denver, and that closed due to the pandemic. So it's been rough. Part of it's been gentrification. 5 Points, the neighborhood has changed a lot, so some places have closed. The second thing is it's just hard to run a business anyway. And then the third thing is, for some of these barbecue proprietors, some of them have passed on and their kids weren't interested in running the business. A great example is Daddy Bruce. So we had Daddy Bruce Sr., legendary barbecuer, who barbecued, ran a place until his 90s, died in 94. But then his son ran a place in Boulder until about 2010 or so. And Daddy or Bruce Randolph Jr. died a few weeks ago. So part of this is just the circle of life, the cycle of life, people moving on. And so all of those things come together and has really diminished the presence of barbecue joints, Black-owned barbecue joints in Denver. And at a time when Denver's barbecue scene is thriving, I mean, we've got some legit places here now. And 20 years ago, I don't know if we could have said that as much, but yeah, I can think of several places that are really good.
That's wonderful to hear too, especially considering you, like you said before, have eaten your way through the country, like you would know, and having watched all that. But can you talk a little bit about that journey, which, and what the physical research of talking to people nowadays, sharing recipes? Because I know that there's often some hesitancy about sharing secret sauces and sharing how barbecue is made. But I'm curious about what was that process like talking to people then, if sometimes it's so secretive.
Right. So, I have to say that because my book is really historical in many senses, I was just talking to sources. So I was just reading newspapers and magazines again. But in terms of the contemporary thing, first of all, you should never lead off by saying, hey, I'm trying to get some recipes, because that's when people clam up. But a lot of times I was introduced to people through a friend, somebody they trust. And I think that's the best route to go. And then, especially with kind of older African Americans, but with the new generation, I mean, I just reached out to them on social media, and they checked me out a little bit and they were ready to talk. So it was a mix of things. But, part of it is just really showing an appreciation for what people do and honoring what they do, and just taking the information as they give it to you. And what I tried to do is, if there were some things that were glaring holes in the information I was getting, I just try to poke and prod a little bit. And then after building that rapport, then I would ask for a recipe. And a lot of times when you get a recipe from these barbecue people, and I think you could say for a lot of cooks, you get what's called a lesser P, which is one ingredient or maybe even more are purposely left out so that you can't exactly replicate that recipe.
That's a good like copyright thing. I think about like poor man's copywriter when cartographers would put certain things on there. That's cool, and very interesting. So going back to the history piece of it, why barbecue? Why was that so important for you to bring to light? And obviously, when you talk about soul food and you did the President's Kitchen, but what was so intriguing about barbecue that you made it your next project?
Well, it really stemmed from the research that I was doing on soul food for my first book on the history of soul food. And, anybody who's been immersed in soul food culture knows that a lot of soul food restaurants will have a barbecue option on the menu, even though it's probably baked, but they still have it on the menu. And then a lot of Black owned barbecue joints have soul food side dishes. And so my thought was, if I'm going to really understand soul food, I really need to learn more about barbecue. And so I just started, and look, before say 2000s, the early 2000s, my deepest thought about barbecue was like, oh man, this tastes good. And then I came across something called the Southern Foodways Alliance. And the Southern Foodways Alliance, the year that I found out about it, they had a barbecue symposium and a barbecue field trip, because they have themes for it. And Southern Foodways Alliance is about exploring the diverse food cultures of the American South. So summer of 2002, I went to Austin, Texas for 3 days. My first time ever going there, and I ate barbecue all those days. And, it was 3 of the happiest days of my life. But in addition to the eating, Southern Foodways Alliance is all about putting, food in a social context. So that's the first time that I heard about the history of barbecue, kind of like how it's cooked, and then race relations around it, all kinds of stuff. So I was just hooked. And though, as I kept doing my research on soul food, I realized, well, I think barbecue is its own thing. And then later, when I started realizing just how much African Americans have been vanished from barbecue storytelling, I was like, okay, look, if you're going to talk about barbecue in the United States, you have to include African Americans. And that seems like an obvious point, but it's not to a lot of storytellers, the media content providers, because there's program after program, book after book. I mean, so many things are coming out. Well, you wouldn't even know that Black people barbecue.
That seems to go against a lot of experience in my life and in other people's lives that I know of it. And I'm curious about the media aspect, because that is something that you touch on in your book, and you talk about different stereotypes of the barbecuer. And I'm curious about how the media portrays it now, and what you would want to see out of the media and what they can do to better that and tell a truer story.
So yeah, one of the things I argue in the book is that when you start looking in the late 80s and the 1990s, that's when it starts to change. Because before that period, it was not the traditional diversity critique you would have of media, because in terms of barbecue, media was quite good at giving shout outs to African Americans. So that changes in the late 80s and early 90s. And my argument is that it's really because of the emergence of foodies. So you've got this middle class group of people intensely interested in food, much more adventuresome in palate than their parents' generation. They've got disposable income, so they're willing to travel. They're curious, and barbecue was rising in popularity around the same time. and there was a commensurate rise in food media to cater to this group of foodies. And so the foodies were asking two things about barbecue: what is it, and where do I get the good stuff? And the people who were in charge of deciding what stories get told, either weren't interested in diversity, weren't diverse themselves, and so white expert after white expert, usually a white dude, was put out as the go-to people when it comes to barbecue. And I identify what I call four archetypal white dudes who love to barbecue. You've got the Bubba type, the working class rural guy. You've got the competition circuit guy. You've got the urban hipster, with interesting facial hair, glasses, tattoos. And then you've got the toke who smokes, and that's the fine dining chef. And so usually one or a combination of these archetypes are put forth as the experts. And so, if I had some romantic music to cue, I would do it right now and just say that the media fell softly, deeply, maddeningly in love with these four kind of white dudes who barbecue. And so as people were looking for experts, those were the experts. And it becomes this echo chamber and thing that feeds upon itself, to the point where by the time you're well into the 2000s, you're getting programs on barbecue purporting to be a representative slice of barbecue culture with no African Americans. And I say the catalyst for my book, the anecdote I love to tell, is watching Paula Deen's Southern Barbecue special on the Food Network in 2004. An hour after the
I'm
show.
like, that was a thing?
Yeah.
Interesting. Or I'm sorry, keep going.
Oh, no. It's a thing because in 2004, Food Network went hardcore on barbecue programming. So they really accelerated making Bobby Flay, again, a fine dining chef who wasn't really known for barbecue. They really accelerated making him the barbecue expert, and they had a number of barbecue programs. And so I saw this ad for Paula Deen's Southern Barbecue. I think it was Paula's Southern Barbecue. And so I watched it because I thought, okay, well, it's going to be a survey. They'll just talk to some interesting people. I just want to see what's going on with Southern Barbecue, knowing in the back of my mind that I was probably going to write a book about it. And when the credits were rolling an hour later, my mouth was agape because there were no African Americans featured on camera, like interviewed as on air talent. And so first of all, I'm thinking, how does this even happen? And then as I write in my book, I wondered if I got it twisted by not paying closer attention to the promotional ad. Maybe it was for Paula Deen's Scandinavian barbecue, sponsored by Alabama White Sauce. So, but it's easy to pick on Paula Deen, but I actually fault the production crew, because I've been involved in TV and I know it's like to be the quote unquote talent. And so, you're kind of plugged into something. So somebody else was, got those stories. And then, somebody else in the Food Network said, oh yeah, this is fine, we're going to run this. So there's a breakdown all along the way. And then as I started looking at other barbecue programming, it was, the problem was pervasive.
Absolutely. So I'm still reeling over that Barbara Scandinavian. That's perfect.
I was proud of that line.
But you're right about talking about that there's a whole, it's not just Paula Deen, it's the whole crew, the team, the developers, the Food Network. There's a group of people, which on one hand seems to make the problem even larger, of that, why didn't anybody see this? And
Exactly.
so in reference to your book, then what do you want to see from that media? Do we want someone who's like Paula Deen, African American, giving it up, or do you want equal? Like, what are you thinking in terms of representation with media and bringing these stories back to light? Because it's a shame they weren't doing that beforehand, especially if they were doing it in the 80s. And then foodies changed it.
Yeah. So it wasn't necessarily foodies who changed it. It was the media catering to foodies.
I apologize. Yes.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I just want to make sure that, yeah.
Please do. Please correct me.
Yeah. So the thing that I want to see, we're starting to see the seedlings of it already. So I just want more diverse and inclusive media. So if you're going to do a barbecue story, just don't make it all about white dudes or all about white people, unless you're doing a very specific thing and that's what the story calls for. But if you're purporting to do a survey of America's barbecue scene, or even any aspect of the history, you have to include African Americans, or it's just not a true accounting. So we're starting to see that. Give you a few examples. Rodney Scott, who's a barbecuer from Charleston, South Carolina, he's got a wonderful cookbook that just came out. It's called Rodney Scott's World of Barbecue. I'm sure you all are selling it. I don't know if you know this, but that's the first cookbook by an African American pitmaster in 30 years. Wow. So now just think about that. Think about all the books that come out on barbecue every single year, and that's the first one. Now you may, some people watching this, well, maybe Black Pitmasters aren't pitching, books, and I'm like, no. First of all, that's not the case. And if you know anything about the publishing world, if the publisher wants a book, they go and recruit writers, and so they seek people out. And I personally know a white writer that was recruited to write the history of African American barbecue by a publisher. And to his credit, he said, no, an African American needs to write that story. So I know that that's happening. Also, media. Netflix had a show called America's Barbecue Showdown that debuted last year, and that had some more diversity to it. And I personally know of some other people who are getting book deals and being asked to be more prominent in barbecue storytelling. So we're seeing the seedlings. I just want inclusive media. And the reason why this is a big deal to me is one, I think we should all be in search of the truth. And then two, there's so much loot being made with barbecue these days. I mean, people are getting really wealthy. And I want African Americans to share in that barbecue prosperity.
Absolutely. I want to ask you too about, because one discovery that you made over the course of your book was the origins of barbecue coming from indigenous peoples in America, and how that seed started and then how it's evolved. And I'm curious about that discovery because you were talking about wanting to originally write an elegy and kind of prove that African Americans had started it, when actually there was another discovery that you made of it goes a little bit farther back than that, in America at least. And so could you elaborate a little bit more about that discovery and that inclusion of indigenous peoples in the history as well?
Well, sure, because the Black Pride part of me wanted to prove that barbecue was African in origin, because I wanted to, do an X across my chest and say Wakanda forever. But barbecue history is hazy, and looking through the sources, unfortunately, isn't that a holy grail newspaper article or magazine thing showing Native Americans and African Americans working side by side to create barbecue. But we can infer a lot because there's a lot talking about Native Americans doing a type of cooking. And later on, we know that African Americans were the principal cooks. So what I did is I looked at European early travel diaries and things and descriptions of Native Americans in what would be called the American South, and what they noted as how Native Americans were cooking meat. And so I distilled that into certain types of cooking. And what I argue is that later on, Europeans fused their quicker grilling and faster cooking techniques with the slow smoking preservation techniques of Native Americans to create something that's different. And you can see the antecedents from the different cultures, but it emerges as something different. And then Africans are thrown in the mix and end up, what I would argue, perfecting this new type of cooking that emerges. So that's what I argue what barbecue is. So it's really Native American in origin, but there are other influences circling there. Now, in my book, I couldn't conclusively prove that it's African in origin. There are several people in this field who believe that it is, but they're taking a more creative, interpretive approach to history. And I leave the door open. I just say, hey, look, I don't see it, but if there is a connection, somebody has to just connect the dots.
No, but that's really interesting too, to talk about this wonderful food, that this wonderful technique, this type of food that so many of us are enjoying nowadays, and its origins and how it is a very fascinating blend. But then, like you said, each steps of who started it versus who perfected it, who's advanced it. And that's so interesting to see this beautiful blend kind of create this amazing type of food that we all love to enjoy now. And I'm curious, speaking about this amazing blend that has gone in so many different directions, how on God's good earth did you only manage to pick like 30 recipes out of this thing? Because there's so many. And after, like you said, you ate at 200 restaurants, you went to the Austin barbecue convention. Like, how did you pick those?
So part of it is I just wanted to have a good mix of historical recipes. I wanted to find recipes that evoke the themes of the chapters, and I wanted to find recipes that are good. So believe it or not, with barbecue, at least getting African American barbecue recipes, that's not as easy as you might think. It's not like there are a whole lot of them out there kind of floating around. And
Yeah.
again, you can ask people for the recipes, and it's hard to sometimes chase that down. So, it was, actually, it was easier than you might think.
Interesting. I'm fascinated by that. That's really cool. Have you tried any of them?
Why would
Any
I
of
do
the
that? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, I've tried them. The one I really like is, and I actually just had it yesterday. I paired up with a food truck called Barbosa's Barbecue, and they made the pork belly burnt ends from my book as they put it as the weekend special, and those are just so good.
I'm so mad I missed that. I love Barbosa's. Anyway, sorry. I'm still getting hungry. Well, I had to ask about the recipes and which ones you recommend because it is National Barbecue Day. It only makes sense that for either tomorrow when it's sunnier in Denver, or those who may be watching us that's outside of this area where it's not raining and you can actually barbecue up.
Well,
So
here's the good, oh, excuse me, but here's the good news. It's National Barbecue Month, so and as long as you do it anytime in May, you're good.
even better. See, I didn't know that. I was like, it's National Barbecue Day. But there you go. It counts. Memorial Day, next weekend, take your pick. And you've got a
Right.
perfect resource with which to start it from.
Yeah.
So I want to open it up to our audience and let them know that there is a Q&A portion of this. It's not just going to be the two of us talking this whole time. So if you have questions, some of you have already been very active in the chat. Please ask your questions for Adrian about Black Smoke, maybe some of his other books. One question I want to start off with, Adrian, here from the audience is, where did your love of food start and why did you want to write about it? Because that's a very, as someone who is not, I have a very bland palate, as my boyfriend likes to say. I find those who love food so interesting. So could you elaborate a little bit more?
Sure. So I was very lucky because my late beloved mother, Johnetta Miller, was a great cook. And not only did she make Southern and soul food, but she was very good at making foods from other cultures. So
Ooh,
I just
cool.
grew up, with a diverse palate. And so, I got my love from cooking from her. And then her father, my maternal grandfather, was a railroad cook on the Southern Railroad. So I think I just had it in my genes. Now, in terms of when I decided to write about it, the short answer is unemployment. So I was working in the Clinton White House, and at that time in my life, I wanted to be the senator from Colorado. So I was trying to get back to Colorado to start my political career, but the job market was slow. And so as I was waiting, trying to transition, I was in this rut where I was watching a lot of daytime television. I'm not even going to tell y'all what shows. And in the depth of my depravity, I just said, I should read something. So I went to the bookstore and a local bookstore, and I found this book on the history of Southern food by a guy named John Edgerton. It's called Southern Food at Home, on the Road, in History. If you're interested in the history of Southern food, you have to get this book. And early in that book, he wrote that the tribute to Black achievement in American cookery has yet to be written. So I just thought that was interesting. So but I'm reading the book 14 years after it was published. So I'm just thinking somebody's put it out there. And so I emailed him a cold, and I just asked him, hey, has somebody really, you wrote this and has somebody addressed it? And he said, nobody's really done it yet. There's always room for another voice, so why not yours? So that's what launched the journey. That one sentence.
That's incredible. I'm sorry. I'm baffled here. That's a story in of itself. How incredible. That's amazing. Well,
Yeah.
damn, good job. Sorry. I find those inspiration stories so fascinating when people are able to trace back to where they found a passion in their life. That's so interesting. And then we're gifted with these three beautiful books you've given us in the world, and hopefully many more after that.
Yeah.
So then here's a great question. Adrian, all the spots growing up in Denver were very Kansas City inspired barbecue joints. At least I think. Does Denver have their own style of barbecue? And if not, do you think we could?
That's a great question. So when people ask me what my favorite regional style is, I say Kansas City for that very reason. I would say the big influence is Kansas City. So Denver does not have its own barbecue style, but we could, because we were known for two things over time: lamb and bison. In fact, if you go back and look at the barbecues of the 1800s, in addition to beef and pork, often you had lamb, and they would have buffalo barbecues. So we could claim that. For whatever reason, especially with lamb, it just lost popularity. But seriously, if you go to a knowledgeable butcher and don't give any context and just say, I'd like a Denver rack, that butcher is going to give you lamb ribs. And Colorado lamb is world famous. I mean, people talk about New Zealand lamb, but Colorado lamb is highly regarded by chefs.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I've been floating the ideas that I think we should have a contest where and home cooks, anybody can be a part of it, where somebody comes up with a signature dish. It should be lamb or bison, maybe both. And then, then we declare a winner. Now, the only way that something becomes a regional style is then other people have to, cook that and own it, right? So it's just one, but we could have that. That's just right there for the taking, really.
Yeah, we're going to talk afterwards about having some sort of tattered cover Denver eats barbecue regional style off. I'm obsessed with this idea now. That's okay. I'm going to back up and go back to the questions before I start spiraling into ideas. That's awesome.
Okay.
That's so cool. And I didn't know that about the Denver rack either. Man, I don't feel like a native in this conversation at the moment. So much more to learn. So another great question here is, what is more important, the way barbecue is cooked or the sauce?
Oh, so that's a great question. I believe it's the way barbecue is cooked. Now, the sauce is very, very important, especially in African American culture. And there's an emerging conventional wisdom that barbecue should be unsauced so you can taste the meat. I just don't. I think a sauce is supposed to complement. But look, if the meat's not good, I don't know how much a soft can do a lot to save it. But man, that meat has to be good. So I think it's really more important is how the barbecue's cooked.
No, that's a great question, and I like that answer because it does. They're important together. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there at all, I think.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who want it unsauced, but to me, I just don't think anyone should walk around and say, "Hey, you should never sauce barbecue," because barbecue from its early inception it was always sauced.
See, you can have both. You can do both. But speaking of barbecue, do you know where the term barbecue came from and how the language changed over time from the original broiled, baked, that type? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's fascinating. So the typical story you hear about barbecue's prehistory is Europeans arrive in the Caribbean during the age of exploration, quote unquote, and they see indigenous people in the Caribbean doing a type of cooking that they didn't recognize before. So the Spanish, Christopher Columbus, even though he's Italian, he was with Spaniards. The word barbacoa is believed to be an approximation of what the indigenous people were calling what they were doing. Now, it gets really confusing from the beginning because barbacoa really and barbecue, and later so it gets anglicized to barbecue, really was just the raised platform that Europeans saw. So what they saw were indigenous people cooking on a raised platform over a very slow fire, and that raised platform was made entirely out of sticks, and that was called a barbecue. So then later, barbecue becomes the food that was on top, and the earliest thing they saw were iguanas and fish and vegetables cooked on this platform, and it was for preservation more so than immediate feasting. And then it becomes a verb, which means the process of cooking that way. So it's all very, very sloppy and imprecise because people were just grappling for words to use. So that's where it comes from. That's where barbecue comes from. So that the whole idea that the French term like cooking from head to tail, barbecue, that's just pure conjecture. It's
That's
really it's really just an attempt to mimic the word that the indigenous people were using.
I I love history in that way when things like it's like a game of telephone and how it just devolves into what we have today. That's really cool that it was the stand at first, not even the food itself.
Right.
Do you know how it went from barbecue to BBQ? Do you know that like when BBQ became a term at all or
I don't. I was trying to chase that down, and I just don't. I haven't figured out when that actually started happening. So yeah, I don't have the answer to that because I was fascinated by that too, because there's so many different ways to spell barbecue. And what I explore in my book is more often than not, you'll see African American owned barbecue joints spell barbecue with a Q rather than a C. And
interesting?
I haven't done whatever the most systematic analysis to decide, if that's nationwide, but that's something that I have noticed and other writers have noticed as well.
No, it's just good to know that there might not be an origin or be able to track it back. Like you said, that magical article that ties it all together. This is a great question about the title and how did the title come to you and decide on that. Now, I know from being in the publishing world, it might not have been your choice, but we still love to know how that came to be.
So the first part, Black Smoke, was definitely my choice. The other part was the publisher's choice. So the way that this came to me is I was watching the anointing of the last pope, and they signal the decision when they show some white smoke, right? So I was like, white smoke, oh, black smoke. And so I just tucked that away because I was working on another thing at that time. So I just tucked that away. I was like, yeah, that's going to be my title. So that's really how it happened.
I love that. That's a great story. It's like, didn't even relate at the time. You're like, oh, that could work.
Yep.
Perfect. So this might be a little bit more of a technical question because your book is based on the history rather than like how to barbecue. But so take it as you will. But what are the best features of a grill setup for optimal barbecue, in your opinion?
All right. So first of all, you have to understand something. I cook the old school way, not the oldest school way, because I'm not digging an actual pit, but I cook in a double barrel smoker. So I'm doing direct heat. I cook with a mix of hickory wood and charcoal. And my favorite thing is to make ribs. Uh, so the main thing, but a lot of people are doing indirect smoking now, which is fine. But the main thing is whatever you set up, do not check your meat frequently, because every time you open that lid, you're losing a bunch of heat, right? So you want to make sure that, and there's all kinds of gadgets now where you can check the temperature of your meat without even opening up the lid. So to me, and this is old school barbecue guy talking, get a double barrel or an oil drum smoker, get a nice mix of whatever wood you like. I just like the perfume from hickory, but have a mix of hickory and coals. And just, it's all about fire management. And I would even suggest having a separate fire going to replenish the coals. And if there's a way you can replenish coals without opening that lid, that's the way to do it. But when I cook mine, I like to do the ribs on the bottom closest to the fire, and then I'll put my chicken and sausage and other things on the second upper rack and let them cook more slowly. But I like to have a little grease dripping down on the fire, just keep it going a little bit, and get that kind of char perfume as well.
And
So
now we've hit the mouth-watering stage of this. I was doing so well until then, but that sounds delicious.
yeah.
This leads to one of my other favorite questions on here is, what are your top 3 meats to barbecue? Which you mentioned ribs being your fave, but you can change it up as needed.
Oh, no. So ribs, chicken, and hot link sausages. Those are my favorites. Now, I'm also admitting my limitations as a cook. I've never tried to cook a brisket or a pork shoulder. So, those were my wheelhouse things. So I've never done those two. I think that those cooking a pork shoulder and a brisket are probably two of the most challenging things to do in barbecue. But I just never done that. So, but at some point, because I have this barbecue book now, I know that I'm going to have to get good at that in order to have more legit cred. So, I'm going to have to read up on how to do that on an oil drum smoker. I think it would be easier to do on, like the grills they have now, like the pellet smokers and other things. I think it's a lot easier to cook. It's still challenging, but just easier. But I really want to know, how could I get good results and good consistent results on that oil drum smoker. So I'll be trying that this summer. I'm
Nice.
sure there's gonna be a lot of trial and error though.
I feel like that those learning to cook in any manner, like not just barbecue, but in all styles, there's trial and error that comes with this art of learning what the best technique is, what culture you want to pull from, emulate, what recipes, and family influences. It feels like the whole art of cooking in general is a trial and error process.
Yeah.
Um, so this is going to be a silly question, and I apologize, but I just learned that competitive barbecue was a thing, like competitive barbecue teams. I had no idea that was a thing. Did you get to watch any of those competitions or participate in any of them in researching for this book?
Yeah, so competitive barbecue has been around for decades, actually, and I years ago, well, I became a barbecue judge in 2004, and then 2000, what was it, 9 or 10? I can't remember exactly. I actually helped a barbecue team, so I've been on both sides of it. Not a lot, but yeah, I've been on both sides of it. So I would say that competitive barbecue has really changed the barbecue landscape. And part of that is just due to one show, Barbecue Pitmasters, which is a chronicle of barbecue competitions. They have changed the game significantly to the point now where you do have backyard cooks now doing stuff that they've seen on these competition shows. And then you see also a lot of barbecue restaurants, and even not even barbecue restaurants, just restaurants in general, are mimicking kind of what they see on the barbecue circuit. So yeah, so competitive barbecue has been a tectonic shift in the barbecue culture.
Is that a thing here in Denver? Or do you, because you were in your bio was talking about judging elsewhere, but is that a thing here in Denver too?
Oh yeah, yeah. So well, let me just say yes and no. So we do have a lot of competitive barbecue in Colorado, but interestingly, most of the contests are outside of Denver. So the
Huh.
biggest contest in the state is something called the Frisco Barbecue Challenge, which is usually the second or third weekend in June. I can't remember. Usually like Father's Day weekend. They're not going to have it this year because of COVID, but that's the biggest contest. But there's also a contest usually in Pueblo. And ever since I became a judge, when I first became a judge, there were only a few contests. But given the popularity of barbecue now, there are multiple contests around the state. I just don't know the status of them because of COVID. But yeah, and so it's the challenge to cook barbecue at altitude in these mountain towns. And the main thing is it gets so cold at night that you really have to watch your fire management and things. So it's not the easiest thing to cook barbecue in the mountains,
I didn't
especially
even
in
think about
competition.
that. Yeah, that's a very valid point. Wow. Well, now I know where I'm going in June of 2022 is Frisco. Uh,
Well, there's a Colorado Barbecue Society, and if you go to their website, they'll list all the barbecue competitions happening in Colorado. So that's a good place to check out.
Wonderful. So we're gonna have two more questions here before we end this evening. And you mentioned some of these before, but someone specifically wanted to know what were your faves of the old school Denver barbecue joints? Sheds, M&D's, House of Barbecue, etc.
Oh, this person knows it. Okay. I loved House of Barbecue. I just loved that place. I was so sad when that place closed, but I loved them. I loved M&D's. There was another place that was called, this was in Littleton. It was called Blessed Barbecue of the Rocky Mountains. It was run by a preacher. And I have a whole chapter on church barbecue. And I don't know what the correlation is between preaching the word of God and smoking meat, but it does exist, at least in African American culture. Um, but yeah, House of Barbecue, that place was so awesome. I love that place. Thank you for reviving that memory. And then other people know about Winston Hills. I think it was called the Hickory House or the Hickory Pit. I can't remember his location when it was on Colorado Boulevard. So those are some of the ones that I remember. But yeah,
I
House of
think
Barbecue is
House is in
great. Yeah.
Parker. There's one in
There's a
Parker.
Hickory House in Parker. So
Yeah,
it must have
that's
been
the
called
one.
the
Yeah, when you said that, that's where my head went. So.
yeah, but his was it must have been called the Hickory Pit.
Mhm.
And then the M&Ds, one of my funniest stories is just they had an insanely hot barbecue sauce. I remember one of the beloved servers there. Whenever somebody would want to order that barbecue sauce, she's like, "Nah, baby, you don't want that." Yeah, I mean, she would actually try to steer you away from that. And I just
That's funny.
I have great memories of that.
Well, Michael was the name of the person asking the question. So well done, Michael, for bringing up those amazing memories. Adrian, I have learned so much in this conversation, learned so much from your book. This part of the reason I love my job is being able to learn so much about areas I never would have on my own. But I'm curious about what did Black Smoke teach you?
So one was just the Native American origins of barbecue, and I had a deepening appreciation for the role that African Americans have played in developing barbecue. And then I got to understand kind of the nuances of barbecue history. Like, a lot of these regional styles that we argue about so fervently, have only been around for like 100 years. So for most of barbecue history, barbecue was done one way. It was cooking whole animals over a trench filled with hardwood burning coals, flipped periodically, and then sauced. And so the move to smaller cuts of meat was really a reflection of the moving from rural barbecue to an urban context. And I really didn't know that. And then the other thing I just didn't know is just like how much African Americans have been celebrated in barbecue history. Now, in a lot of this media, because of the racial dynamics of the time, they weren't mentioned by name or full name, but there were cases where they were, and I had no idea how much African Americans were centered in barbecue. There are newspaper articles which say you can't have legitimate barbecue unless an African American is involved in the process.
Wow.
These are articles as early as 1830s.
Wow. I wow. I Well, and you're continuing it. You're mentioning them by name. You're bringing this to the forefront in Black Smoke. And I know this is the start of many conversations for people, and it's the continuation of conversation and story. And we're so excited to have you as a local here in Denver guiding us and being an amazing judge and also an amazing historian to bring this to us. So thank you so much for this gift in this book. And we're excited for many more to come from you, I'm sure. But so I want to remind everybody that you can get copies of Black Smoke at tatteredcover.com or at one of our locations. We're here with Adrian Miller. And Adrian, I want to give you the opportunity to remind people who you are, where they can find you online, and anything else that you want to say before we close out this afternoon.
Yeah, well, thank you for the time. And, just to add on to punctuate what you just said, I always think of my books as an appetizer, to start the conversation, keep them going. There may be new evidence or stuff that surfaces where we find like different conclusions, but, I just wanted to keep the conversation going. So I'm Adrian Miller, the soul food scholar. My tagline is dropping knowledge like hot biscuits. And you can find me at soulfoodscholar.com and also Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you just do Soul Food Scholar at Soul Food Scholar, you'll find me on most platforms.
And we're Tattered Cover Bookstore, who's so happy to be having this book on our shelves, which is perfect for National Barbecue Day and National Barbecue Month. So get your copy, learn up, study up, and also get some great recipes for your next barbecue as well. Thank you, Adrian, so much for joining us. If you'll just stick with me here while I close out. Thank you all again for supporting local independent bookstores, as it is National Barbecue Day, and there's so many great independent and African American owned businesses that you can support out here in Denver and in wherever you're local as well. So we encourage you to do that. We are the heart and soul of your community, and we would not be here without you. Local businesses really need your help now, so thank you so much for that. We encourage you again to get copies of Black Smoke by Adrian Miller at tattercover.com. Stay safe, everybody, and happy reading and happy eating. Bye, all. And we're